Have you ever wondered what true greatness really is? If so, well then you've found the right show. On this podcast, you'll hear real people sharing real stories of real change. Welcome to the Searching for Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Michael Fleer, and I'm so glad that you're here. Today on the show, I am joined by Pastor Stephen Miller. He is the head pastor at Community Bible Church in Norfolk, Nebraska, and that's also the church that I attend. When he was growing up, Pastor Miller had all the right answers about being a Christian. Many people in his life even thought that he was a great model for a young kid being a Christian. But it wasn't till he was a teenager that he realized he needed to make a change. I hope you enjoy listening to how Pastor Miller found true greatness. I'm joined with Pastor Stephen Miller today. He is the pastor at Community Bible Church. How was your day today?
Very good, Michael. I'm glad to be with you.
It didn't rain here, though, did it?
No, it's been very dry.
Yes, it has been dry, but we've been praying for rain, and it could be happening. Well, Pastor, you've been to lots of places in your young life. You have a wonderful family. You get to live in the best state in all of America. And I'm wondering, have you found true greatness?
Most definitely. And of course, credit all that to the Lord. And everything, I think in so many ways, greatness is defined by God. He's what brings that greatness. And so, amen.
Yes. So let's start with you as a child. I know you had some siblings. You grew up in a home with a pastor for a dad. So just tell us a little bit about what life was like growing up as a young kid.
Yeah, so I grew up in a little area, Tower Hill, Illinois, and we were actually 3 miles north of Tower Hill, so we lived in a very rural area. We did have some neighbors, but we definitely were not in town by any way, by any spectrum. And we lived near the railroad tracks. We barely got internet. It was just out in the middle of nowhere, and you know how that is some. Yep. But my father and mother moved to Illinois when I was hardly a year old, and they met one another at Tennessee Temple University back in the day. And so when the Lord led them to Illinois, they've been there since, still serving there now. And the church my father's at is Knobs Baptist Church. I think it's been about 28 years now that he's pastored there, and that's been his first church, and he's been there since. But I got 3 siblings, an older sister, and then an older brother, and then I got a younger sister. So I'm the third, the one in the middle.
That's a good spot.
Yeah, the one nobody cares about.
Yeah.
But we, of course, always grew up in a Christian home. Of course, that doesn't mean anything when it comes to Christianity. As a young age, that was a lot of what I had held on to, was the very fact of my parents being Christians and them, having been in ministry and all that sort of thing. But that was much of what I held on to at a young age for what I considered to be greatness. Yeah.
Right. Do you ever remember thinking about heaven and hell? I mean, you grew up in a church, so obviously you had heard what heaven was, but do you remember ever thinking about, okay, is this actually real? Is this just some kind of storytelling they tell?
Yeah, if you would have asked me at a young age, I could have told you, very easily what heaven and hell and what the Bible says about them. But if I ever had truly considered myself particularly in hell, that didn't come till later on in my life, that I had really just gotten serious about it, really considered the brevity of life.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you kind of talked about your lifestyle and growing up in church. Did you memorize verses growing up? Were you in Sunday school? And basically, I guess you were probably in church every time the doors were open.
Yeah, every time, rain, snow, or sunshine. And if we were the only people there, I was there all the time and expected to be. And people talk a lot about pastors' kids, and sometimes you can go one of two ways, and in the ways of me relating with that, obviously everyone makes their own choice at the end of the day, but it came to a point in my life where I had to ask myself, am I just doing this because I'm being told to and because of what is expected of me? Or am I doing this because I'm actually genuinely serving the Lord and wanting to worship the Lord? And I could quote verses, and I knew the hymns, and without the hymn book, I never forgot my Bible. In Bible school, I was usually always the first place winner for my age group. That was me. I was had it down pat for all of where I was at.
So was there a moment when you realized your need for a savior, or was it more of a gradual thing over time?
Yeah, so I to be honest with you, I don't remember entirely when I was younger the whole situation, but I knew that the idea of becoming a Christian intrigued me, not so much of the fact of having a relationship with God, but it was more the fact of what credit would be given to me from the people in the church and my own parents. And so I had made it, as we would call a profession. I had said a prayer, and none of it was anything more than just really to get a pat on the back. I was so much of that type of a kid growing up. It was always to do something for attention. And my sister could get me to do anything, and I'd be getting into trouble. Just ask me to do it, and I'd do it. That was me. But didn't really start getting serious about it until I was about 12 years old. And it was actually at a church camp, a junior church camp. And in the swimming pool of all places, I had attempted to swim through the deep end, and you had to go from one end to the other and back, and just to show that you actually could do the swimming. And I have never really been a swimmer, and growing up in a pastor's home, we just never did public pool swimming. So, I had used all of my breath going one way, and on the way back, I just sunk down to the bottom. And I remember as I was going down, and of course, even though 12 years old, I think that pool was like, I don't know. For me, it felt like it was like 50 feet deep, because I was just sinking down. And I don't even think I was squirming or anything. It was like an immediate thought in my mind, like, I'm going to die. My life is coming to an end. And I remember, my eyes were open at the time and seeing this guy, clothes and everything, jump into the pool and pulling me out. And that was really the time where I thought to myself, if I died and I ended up in hell, what would I do? Could I do anything? And the truth is, I'm asking myself these questions, but I know the answer. But I'm too afraid to do anything about it, because at this point in time, it's a 12-year-old boy. I'm getting ready to be a teenager. I'm stepping into that junior high age. Started that junior high age, and I didn't want anyone to look at me and think, "Wow," And you said you were, Right. It was all about me. It was a complete inward focus, relationship with God, I guess, if you want to say.
Yeah. Would you say your siblings, your friends, your parents at that time, would have they thought you were a Christian, or do you think they had no idea really what you believed?
I guess I would like to say that they would have thought that I was. I mean, obviously no one knows the heart. It wasn't like I was outright living in sin. I struggled with a lot of rebellion growing up with my parents. I didn't have the greatest relationship with them, especially didn't with my older sister. We clashed a lot, personality. But, I would say, generally speaking, most people in the church and my family, they knew what my profession of faith was. So I can't say necessarily when I came to know the Lord that it was like, wow, I had no idea. But it was more like, okay, maybe now he's getting more serious about life, and maybe that truly was why he was the way he was,
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned the pride a little bit. I've heard so many people talk about that. You might make a profession of faith when you're a young kid, but there was actually nothing real there. It wasn't actually a decision. And that's hard to grow up and have everyone thinking you're a Christian, and you're trying to make that choice of, I know I need to do this. But when you're at a church service, what's everyone going to say about me if I come out and say that I'm actually saved now? Is everyone just going to think that my life up to this point has been fake?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things to think about.
Yeah. I had a lot of, I say I had a lot of dreams. It wasn't like I had a lot of goals necessarily, but I really did, in my mind, even as a 12-year-old boy, had no intent to be in ministry. It was not my goal to be long-time, full-time ministry. Of course, God had other plans, but that was not my desire. If I really had a lot of, even as a young boy, had a lot of interest in going into law enforcement or something along those lines. Just having an everyday sort of job at the minimum, and I think probably there was good and bad in it, but we had some neighbor kids that lived across from us, and they were just your average people, they worked basic jobs and that sort of thing. And but the kids would go to the public school, and there was a lot of, for living out in the country, but yet still having those neighbor kids that, there was a lot of intent to try to follow in their footsteps, because it was something different. It was a whole different life. They weren't Christians. Didn't grow up in a Christian home. And there were a lot of things that we weren't to do or to be around them when they were doing because of the lifestyle they lived. But, so that in itself intrigued me. Even as a junior high kid, it was like, I want to be like that. I don't want to be like my parents. I want to be like them. And, on the flip side, it was like, okay, I'm going to do everything. I know how to do everything my parents expect of me and the church expects of me. So I felt like I was good on every side, So when the reality hit me, it was like hell is a real place. That's when it was like a struggle now, a fighting with myself. What do I do? How am I going to do something about this? Am I going to get serious about this? And, as I'm talking here, I shared with a lot of people too, some of what led to this even further was just prior to that camp, that same summer, that I had risen my hand in the midst of an invitation at the wrong time. I had gotten really good at raising my hand, and when the question was asked, do you know that you're a Christian, or if you've ever received Christ? And I rose my hand at the wrong time, and the evangelist, just out of care, not because he was trying to push me to do anything, but he told my father about it, and my dad approached me and just said, "Hey, is everything okay? Saw you rose your hand or the evangelist said something, he saw you rose your hand." And I said, no, it's nothing. But then this happens at the camp, and just really took me a step back.
Yeah, and that's evidence that God was working in your life, and there's sometimes things that God just has to do to get a hold of your mind, to get a hold of your heart. So was there a point then when you realized that you weren't on your way to heaven and you needed to change that? You got that settled with yourself?
Yeah, so I wrestled with this for the next, I don't even remember, to be honest, the exact amount of time, but I want to say a good couple months, if not more. And, just kind of this back and forth of, I know that I need to respond, and I know that I need to change my life, but I haven't yet. And if I remember correctly, I want to say my brother, having in some sense of a similar profession, that he had made a decision at a young age, but got serious about living for the Lord, and made sure in his own life. Seeing my brother respond, that was causing me again. Okay, now I feel like I'm pressured even more. Like I don't want to. I don't want to be the only one who's not, so, but it had to be a decision of mine, and I knew it did. And, when it came down to it, it was a Sunday night, just a normal service. And, I remember during the invitation, I was just so gripping the pew. And even as a boy, my hands were sweating and everything. And, and in a small church, not that many people are responding in invitation. So, and I had responded many times and gone down to the altar and kneeled down and prayed. But again, this is a whole different situation. I'm actually going because I intend to go and talk to the Lord, and meet the Lord. And so I finally, pushed myself to go forward, and my mom took me into one of the back offices, and I could have said everything she was sharing with me. I just sat and nodded my head as she briefly went over the Romans Road, and I prayed and received the Lord. And I think I was baptized within the next a week or so. And then, I mean, it's that was the day the Lord changed my life.
That's amazing when Jesus comes into your heart, changes your life, and I'd imagine you had a lot of joy after that decision.
Yeah, by the time I just released my pride and just did what I knew that I needed to do, there's no greater peace, to describe. And in the life that now I desire to live, can't say I lived it by perfection by any means of the spectrum, but the life that I now desire to live was completely different. I mean, I was willing to give my life to the Lord if that's what he wanted me to do, and that's what I would say was the bigger picture in my mind. It was like, okay, now everything I closed myself off to concerning the side of ministry or serving God is now a possibility, if God would want me to do it.
Right. And you said about living in God's will. Now, do you remember any specifics about how you felt him directing your life and laying his purpose upon your heart?
It was within the next year that God had just stirred my heart towards a matter of the call to preach. And I want to say I was 13, maybe about 14 years old, somewhere in that frame. And we were actually, it was also yet again another Sunday night, but we were doing just for fun within the church. We called it an old-fashioned Sunday. And everyone in the church was dressing up, wearing bow ties and vests and, all this old-fashioned clothing. And I remember I had this big old bow tie that from when my dad was, in college. So, I remember responding in the invitation. I don't remember entirely if the message had to do with, God's will. I want to say that it did. And at the time we had a youth pastor, and he'd taking me downstairs in the church, and I talked with him, and I remember I'm crying, and this big bow tie and everything, and I'm just he telling me, you take the bow tie off, I'm just like weeping and everything, and he's just like, what's wrong? Why are you crying? And I just know that God is telling me to do something, is pressing on my heart to do something, and I'm not really sure what. Now, I said I'm not really sure what, but I knew, and I hadn't quite forwardly told him exactly what it was yet. But he's like, okay, and he prayed with me and talked with me. And eventually my dad had come down, everyone had pretty much left the church by that point. And Pastor Adam, that was my youth pastor, he talked with me just briefly, or talked with my father just briefly. And then my dad turned to me, and about as soon as he did, I remember running up to him, giving him a hug and saying, Dad, I know that God is calling me to preach. And that was the first time Pastor Adam heard, and he's like, oh, God's calling you to preach, and that's, and so that was the night that I had given my life to the Lord and surrendering the call to preach. And, and of course the teenage years were getting ready to hit, and can't say that commitment was easy to stay through, but, the Lord's definitely helped me, through that.
Right. And a lot of times when you're a teenager, you kind of know what God's will is. You might see how he is leading, but there's such a struggle to want to fit in with people.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That pressure that I had when I was younger, I thought was bad. It was 10 times worse as a teenager. And, when I started getting 16, 17, driving and all that sort of thing, and being able to have a little bit more leeway of what I wanted to do with things, and I started working a job, and it became really a back and forth in my mind of like, what if I just stayed home, and what if I just stayed working this job, and what if I just kept doing what I'm doing and live life this way, There were even thoughts in my mind like, well, at the very minimum, maybe I'd just stay in my dad's church and just stay here, and that seems okay. Of course, God had different plans, so.
Right. It'd be a lot more comfortable to stay with what you know instead of going to Bible college, maybe going to different churches where you don't know the people. But following God's leading, you got to go to Bible college and even to study abroad. And did you learn a lot from those experiences?
Yeah. So, of course, I knew a lot of Bible colleges growing up. My dad had traveling groups in all the time, every summer. And I kind of got an idea of what the colleges emphasized on, if they were more ministry focused or if you were going to secular field. And I knew, again, what God had called me to do. So I was looking for a ministry based school, but I say I had surrendered to the call to preach. By my teenage years, there was quite a pullback. There were so many things that relationships and all that sort of thing that I wanted to keep in my life. And so, while I had surrendered everything at a younger age, I had gained some things of my own desires and was holding on to those. But God ended up leading me to Crown College in Powell, Tennessee. And most of that was, I would say, it was of the Lord, but there was a part of that, I wouldn't say most of it, there was a part of that that was really to get away from home. There's a desire to get away, but God had an intent to have me there and to receive the training. I know he had no intent to lead me elsewhere. My reason in going was just different than, and my thinking was that I was doing what I wanted to do, but in reality it was God leading me, and it wasn't until my second year in college, my sophomore year going into my junior year, that God really just stirred my life in so many different ways. And that was a big life-changing moment for me.
Yeah. Would you say that first year in college, there was some new things that kind of took your focus off of the Lord? Like, I don't know, maybe friends or getting new cars, just new things now that you were out on your own that kind of drew your attention away from God?
Yeah, you get a lot of the college vibe of, especially as a freshman, every freshman just thinks they're on top of the world, and they've all got these big goals in their mind, and you start realizing that, man, I thought I had goals, and look at what this guy's doing, or I thought my car was cool, and look at this guy's car, and you're comparing yourself so much more with everyone else. And then if you're not careful, because just like Bible college, just like anywhere else, even though they're in a Bible college, doesn't necessarily mean that they're all full out committed to go into ministry, or if they're even going into ministry, it just depends on the situation. And so, seeing some people that were living a life that was only halfway committed, that I would say, what more than maybe me being tempted to live that life, it was me beginning to see like, okay, this is like even more of what I'm already doing, and if I'm not careful, I'm going to begin doing this myself.
Yeah. So you got to study abroad. What's some of the countries that you got to visit?
Yeah. So in 2013, which was my sophomore, junior year, that was the year that God had just really brought me to the end of myself, and he provided the means for me to study in the UK, the United Kingdom, for a 4-month period of time. And that was at none of my expense. That was completely provided. And having brought me to that point in my life and seeing him provide in that way was just clearly of the Lord. And here I'm thinking like, okay, I'm already halfway through college. Like I'm going to be, this is my end of sophomore year, that last semester I'm finishing up, that I'm spending this time in the United Kingdom. And I'm thinking I'm pretty ready to go into ministry. And what they had us doing that whole time was, well, not just the studying, but every single weekend we were in a different church. And sometimes we were there in a different church together. Sometimes we were split up in groups, and we were preaching and singing and, cleaning out things and all, just whatever really the pastors wanted us to do. And so I found myself not prepared at all to preach. I mean, that was probably the biggest thing. It was like, oh my goodness, I thought I was ready for this, and I'm most definitely not. And I'm speaking to people, though they can understand what I'm saying in English, I am speaking such improper English in so many ways that feel like, that time that we had about 12 of us that went, we became pretty close, the 12 of us, but at the same time, it also caused me to really see my rough edges. It was almost like during that time that God just kind of knocked all of the crutches out from under me, and I was just falling flat on my face. And one of the things that I saw that was being used, that Satan was using in my life to really distract me, was my phone. And I had gotten so focused on my phone. we had one particular weekend. Some of the weekends, I want to say it was weekend, maybe it was Fridays or Mondays. There was one particular day in the week that we would have like a day off, so to speak. And we could kind of, in the United Kingdom, you can go jump on a train and be anywhere, and be on the other side of the country pretty much within just 30 minutes or so. And so I went out on my own, and a couple of the guys were doing something else, and I can't remember what. And so I went out on my own, brought just me and my phone and my backpack was pretty much all I had, and took a bunch of pictures, all that sort of thing. And everything had gone well, except for when I went back, I realized when I got off the train, I had left my phone on the seat. And I was so mad and so frustrated. This was, I want to say it was like my first iPhone. It was like an iPhone 4, and I thought it was like the coolest thing ever, And so, I was so upset that I'd missed this phone. I called the train company, lost and found, all this sort of thing. Of course, it was gone. And learning to live at that time without my phone, I was already we could only bring 2 bags maximum. So I only had like enough clothes to last for 1 week because we went in the winter time. So like I had my coats and stuff with me too, and just learning to live without and just simply just do what was there in front of me was like me realizing that ministry is not about me at all. And it's not at all what I want. And what was really interesting, kind of summarizing it all, when God brought me to the end of that time, of course, I'm all stirred up and encouraged. But I'd hardly been home maybe 2 weeks. And I want to say that I had I just received a package in the mail. I don't think it was a letter. It was a package. And it was actually that phone that somebody in England had returned the phone because I lost my phone that came up apparently somewhere. And so somebody returned it from England to my home address. And what was amazing was, this has been like 2 or 3 months since, and it just happens to arrive like 2 weeks after I'm home. And, by then I had already gotten a new phone, and I already concluded in my mind that I could care less if I have one. I learned to live without it. And that was just like another way of God showing me, like, when you give your life to me and when you surrender yourself to me and set everything else aside, I will provide for you. I'll meet your needs. I'll even meet your desires, And so that and of course it was that same summer that I traveled neighborhood Bible time. And then, then I'm getting to preach, take what I had learned there in England of what I felt like I didn't know how to preach and put it into action during Bible time. And so, that was 2013. 2013 was a big year for me because it was that fall too that I met my wife. So, of course not at the time, but so that was a big life-changing year for me.
That does sound like a big year and an exciting year. And one of the things I love about doing this podcast is hearing how God works in the growth of a Christian after they get saved, and just how, it's not like God puts up a poster or a billboard up and says, this is the next step, but you can feel the promptings of the Holy Spirit and what God wants you to do next.
Well, and sometimes it's neat to see how, it's not like God brought me from a drug addict lifestyle or something like that, but God can just use some of the silliest things to draw us to the end of ourselves and to help us to realize His goodness and His mercy and His grace and His will for our life, So, amen.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned that you met your wife, but before you got married, you actually started a job as a youth pastor. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we got engaged. When I finished college, we got engaged like within the next week after I finished. And she still had another year to finish. She was studying elementary education. And so I had actually, just kind of back up a little bit, I did a missions trip, that after spending time in England, like I didn't even want to go home anymore. Where my original intent of going to college, it was like, I want to get away from home. Now it was that I just didn't want to go home. I want to just get busy for God, So I went on this mission trip. I didn't know where I was going to end up being at. I had messaged a bunch of pastors and trying to find some positions. The school had provided for me, different churches in need of pastors and youth pastors. And I wanted to serve under someone. I knew that God had called me to preach. I was open to and so was Rebecca. We were open to, the potentiality of evangelism. We actually had even talked a lot about camp ministry. We just knew before any of that would take place, it would be working with a pastor in a church. And so God ended up leading us to Katy, Houston area, where I served there for 5 years. That first year, though, by myself, I was bacheloring it, and it was a necessary experience. I would say it would have been even harder to have started marriage and ministry at the same time, because I was able to kind of get my feet on the ground for ministry, and then I had a little more leg room to get my feet on the ground for marriage when that time actually came, So
that's really neat. Did you enjoy the big city of Houston?
When God led me there, it was me knowing that, okay, this is completely different than home. It's going to push me beyond my limits. It's going to be something I'd never done before. And that was much of the reason of me knowing this is definitely God leading. And of course, there were so many other things too, that God just confirmed the whole way through of us being there. So, in the city was just the experience there, being able to work with inner city kids. But I would say on that sense too, some more upper class and very multicultural, So a lot of things to love about the city, a lot of things that I didn't like, especially the traffic. I mean, I didn't realize how much I hated traffic until we moved here to Nebraska. So, but it was nice to have everything at your fingertips. I mean, and especially for the church, like I was just telling you about the internet here, if something broke down, you could just go and get it, but not so much in a smaller town, but you don't have the traffic. It's almost a good trade in some ways, And of course, now with Amazon, you can just order something and have it in 2 days. But
that's right. What was it like being the pastor for a bunch of teenagers? I mean, I know that can sometimes be a little stressful. What did you learn through that?
I would say, more than learning with the teenagers, it was learning to work with a pastor. That was probably for me the bigger experience, and learning that, first of all, God had led me there, and this was not the ministry that I had begun, so I wasn't here to run the show, and I was here to be an extension of his ministry. And so when I got beyond myself of, letting myself being told what to do and just letting myself be reminded that God is the one who brought me here, when I got past that and being able to just do ministry because God had called me, that changed the perspective. And with teenagers, we worked with about 40 teenagers. We had a Christian school there too. We were with them on a weekly basis. We had different youth activities with them. It was a lot of work, especially the first year. It was really hard to connect. The seniors didn't know me at all, and so they carried so much of a relationship with them. I really didn't feel like, some guys say it's by their second year. For me, it didn't feel like even until my third year that I had felt like I was actually gaining some ground with a relationship with the teens, because I was always hearing, it used to drive me nuts. That's why I say I had to get beyond myself, because it was always, well, the former pastor, Pastor so-and-so used to do this, and Pastor so-and-so used to let us do this, or we did these things. And I'm like, well, you don't have them here anymore. It's me who's your youth pastor, But being able to have an activity every week, and therefore, as a result, preach every week. I was preaching Saturdays, Sunday school, and then chapels. So I was still preaching 3 times a week, just like I would as a pastor, a senior pastor. And so it was really through a lot of that God had just grown my heart even more towards the pastorate, and working with those teens was like working with a miniature church, having kids from 12th grade down through the 7th grade, and working with them consistently and listening to their problems, and, working together with the parents and extending that into the church ministry itself. It was just like, wow, this is God just confirming to my wife and I both that this is where God had us. So
awesome. And I'm sure you loved it down there in Houston, but then God actually led you to a little bit of a place more like your home, if I had to guess. And so tell us, how in the world did you end up here in Norfolk, Nebraska?
Yeah. So we knew by the end of it wasn't even quite 5 years. By my fourth year, it was actually interesting because my wife and I were having kind of the conversation I'm having with you now about God had grown our hearts toward this, and we knew that the pastorate's the next step. And we were talking about a lot of the what ifs, and we were just laying in bed, just talking, what if God led us to a church like this, or what kind of church, or what kind of place, or, what would we, because we knew our desires would become God's desires, and God will lead us to the right place. And ultimately, we wanted to go somewhere there was a need. We wanted to go somewhere where we knew that there really wasn't that many other Bible-believing churches in an immediate distance. And so therefore, knowing that we would just be able to really make a difference. And so we prayed a lot about it. And I kid you not, the very next day, that was a Friday, the next day we had soul winning visitation. And I came back, I would take the van out and take a group of teenagers and then some adults, and we'd go out door knocking. And I came back and parked the van. I was walking back to the front door, and I get a call from a man who says, "Hey, I know this church in Missouri is looking for a pastor, and just wanted to pitch it to you. I know you've been there serving, but they're looking for a pastor. Would you think about it? Would you pray about it?" And I remember it wasn't even so much the idea of where, it was the idea of God confirming that this is what. And so I caught my wife as soon as possible. I said, "You won't believe the call I just got. I mean, we just had this conversation." And so, from that point forward, it was, obviously God didn't lead us to Missouri, but I talked to my pastor further and said, "Hey, we know that God is leading us this direction." And I want to say it was by this point, we were already maybe 4 or 5 months left in the year that we had started to make a bigger push towards trying to find somewhere. And COVID-19 had not yet hit. This is like mid 2019. And I had tried to reach out to some people, and I'm backing up here a little bit. So I want to say it was like March that I had come into contact with what was the interim pastor here, and you guys were looking for a pastor, and he had reached out to me and just sent a general message that he clearly had sent to several other men. And so I just responded, having already looked up the church before responding. And, Community Bible Church, it's in Nebraska. I remember I'm sitting in my office and we're in the house, and I said, "Honey, come look at this church." And we looked at the picture, and she said, "Where's this at?" I said, "It's in Nebraska." And she goes, "Nebraska?" And I was like, "Yeah." I said, "Can you?" And so then, that first day, here we're talking about Nebraska, and it was like, what if God led us to Nebraska? And of course, when you start talking about all these things, it's like now you're looking up how far are you from this, and what's actually in that area, and what type of people are there, and what's Nebraska known for, And so we're, we just sit and we're looking things up on Google and all this sort of thing, and not knowing any of the answers to these things. And we haven't even heard the response. We haven't even hardly messaged the guy back. We're just looking at all this. And one thing led to another. We talked. He said, "Okay, well, I'll get back with you." I want to say it was by May that things had led to, "Okay, well, what would you think about coming to visit?" And by that June, we had actually come here, and we were here, I think, for a week. And so within that week, it was like, by then we pretty much already knew. And being here, it was even more just knowing that this is definitely where God has us. And long story short, here we are. And of course, a lot's happened since then. We've seen the Lord bless, but having our 2 children here has been a huge change of life, but a huge blessing at the same time. And we're thrilled to be here, excited for the future. So
yes, it has been exciting to have you here. And like you said, there's been a lot that's gone on. There's been a lot of people who have come to know Jesus as their Savior, both in children and adults. And if there's people in the Norfolk area listening, or maybe the surrounding area, how could they find more out about this church, Community Bible Church?
Well, we have our website, which is probably going to be the greater source of things. It's mycbcnorfolk.com. And that's going to have a lot of our layout of our ministry. We also do have our services, our live stream on Facebook Live, and we also have podcasts on Apple Music and Google Podcasts and Spotify and some of the other like platforms. So that, even if somebody didn't come here in person, they have a way of listening to us by video or even by audio if they desire. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me. And is there anything else that you wanted to hit on?
I don't think so, but Michael, thank you for letting me be a part, and we're excited to see where this goes. We're glad to see you working with people in this way, and I guess I would just say, in general, if there's a search for greatness in your life, no matter who you are, and you're trying to find an answer to something, you're trying to grasp to something, there's no greater peace than you can ever find in anything else than through Christ himself. And so again, thank you, Michael.
I really enjoyed getting to hear Pastor Miller share his story. It took a literal almost drowning for him to realize that he needed to make a change in his life. Maybe you're in the same boat as he was, but for you it's not a literal drowning with water. Maybe you feel like your life is kind of a mess right now, that something needs to change. There's something you've been searching for. You're not finding fulfillment in the things that this world has to offer. When someone's drowning, they need someone to save them. And if they're able to, the immediate reaction to drowning is you call out for help. You call out for someone to save you. Maybe you're in need of that with your life. And the Bible makes it very clear that for whoever is in that situation, Jesus will save you. Romans 10:13 says, "For whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved." Are you in need of that today? This could be the day that you find true greatness, if you have not done so already. Thank you so much for listening to the Searching for Greatness podcast. If you'd like to find out more about Community Bible Church, there is a link posted in the description for this podcast episode. If you are around the Norfolk, Nebraska area, we'd love to have you stop in and visit. If you'd like to get in contact with the show, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram. We have a YouTube channel. And if you'd like to ask a question about anything at all, you can just send the email to michael@searchingforgreatness.org. Hope that everyone's having a good November. And next week, we'll actually be having a Thanksgiving special on the podcast. So I'm really looking forward to that and hope you are too. Toodles and happy trails until we meet again.